So here we're going to talk a little bit about virtual reality. So this has been a fairly crazy past couple months. We've seen the releases of the Oculus Rift and the HTC Vive. A lot of people who ordered them don't have them yet, but that's okay. This industry is really taking off quickly in terms of the metrics being thrown out there, in terms of a lot of the enthusiasm happening. A lot of people are saying that this industry, Goldman Sachs says, could be worth $80 billion by 2025, and everybody in the industry is citing that number because it's pretty exciting. Today, a lot of the excitement is around the hardware side, but we're going to dive a little bit into the content side. So to talk about that, I have Dave Cole, who is the co-founder of NextVR, which is a company doing some amazing stuff in the live streaming virtual reality space. And as well, we have Shanna Tellerman, who is the CEO of Modsy, a company that's doing some cool stuff with 3D modeling in homes and a little bit of virtual reality on the side. So we're going to dive into some cool VR discussion. To start off, Shanna, I'm curious, when you're looking at VR content, how is productivity actually going to ever come into VR, or is it something that's always going to be about entertainment?
Well, I would argue that shopping for your home is somewhat entertainment as much as productivity. I think that we definitely need to have this be a mainstream consumer adoption before we're going to start seeing the more practical side of VR actually take off. Mm-hmm. The part that excites me is some of what happens behind the scenes, and even the step before sort of headsets and goggles. How do you get 3D out to a more mass audience? Yeah. And I think we're going to see all kinds of things starting to reach consumers that make use of the kinds of technologies that are driving the content creation of VR.
Mm-hmm. Dave, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, so we hope that we are attracting the consumer to VR. What we've done is go out to some of the largest fan bases in the world, mm-hmm. And try to bring that content into virtual reality. So we just recently shot the Kentucky Derby. We've shot with we shot the season opener to the NBA, the NBA game with the Warriors this mm-hmm. year. We carried a NASCAR race, the Daytona 500 live. So, and we just announced a 5-year, 150-show plus deal with Live Nation to bring live music to the platform. So, what we've tried to do is again go out to these large fan bases as they intersect with the growing VR audience. Make sure that we've just got a flood of content available mm-hmm. for them.
Awesome. So Modsy's a bit, it's not entirely a VR application. There's a lot of 3D modeling happening, but what's Modsy's relationship with VR, and how do you kind of see it as an asset to your company?
Yeah, I mean, I'm very excited about the future of VR and AR. It's not in the hands of every consumer today, so we're waiting for that kind of tipping point to happen. Mm-hmm. I think the presence that you get when you're able to actually be in a space, see a space, and for me, the ability to kind of visualize something actually while you're standing there, see it on your wall, see it on your floor. I think that's like a fantastic promise. Yeah. But the reality is that most of the consumers who need that kind of help today, they don't have VR, they don't have AR in their living room quite yet, mm-hmm. right? So with Modsy, we're trying to bridge that gap. So we have an incredible technology in the background. We're building out 3D models of every space, 3D models of furniture. We're designing every home and an asset in a way that when VR hits in the mainstream consumer's home, mm-hmm. that we could take advantage of it. But until that inflection point, we're not quite ready.
Sure. So tell people in the audience exactly what Modsy is doing for people and what kind of services people are getting from Modsy right now.
Yeah, so Modsy is meant to be a personalized catalog of your very own home. So we allow consumers to take photos of their home. They just take a handful of photos, and then they take a style quiz on our site. We combine those two things together, and we give them back a personalized, shoppable catalog of their house. We use 3D technology in the background to create a photorealistic version of their home. We use 3D furniture to populate the space in various ways based on their style. We use photorealistic rendering process to produce, right now, images, but also 360 views. And then we send them back a basically personal URL. And then all the products in there are things that they can actually buy in the real world.
When I move into my new apartment, I will check it out because I have horrible taste otherwise.
Get on my VIP queue, yeah.
Yes, awesome. So, Dave, NextVR seems to be have its hand in a lot of different kind of, types of entertainment right now. So tell me a little bit about what NextVR's end game is.
Yeah, so again, right now we're doing about one live event a week. Mm-hmm. So Our hope is to build a gravitational pull around NextVR as a consumer portal where you go to see what's on VR. And that's live, it's also VOD content, so we do a show like the Kentucky Derby, it gets re-racked as VOD right away, and then we cut highlights, and it becomes a lot of collateral, VR collateral and content to watch. And so our hope is, as sort of the train pulls out of the station here, and we go from one live event a week to 2 to 3 to 4 by the end of this year, NextVR is the place to go to watch, to watch something live or something new.
Sure. I mean, so both of your companies have raised a fair amount of money in the last few months, even recently, and it seems like most of the money in VR seems to be more on the hardware side, going to companies like Magic Leap, in fact, just Magic Leap a lot.
Yeah,
but
a lot.
Yes, exactly. But what do they do? Who knows? What advice would you have for some younger companies in the VR content space in terms of the challenges for raising right now?
Yeah, I think so. What we hear from some of the investors that we've worked with and some that we know is that they are seeing a lot of deal flow. They aren't seeing a lot of quality product, and I think that that's maybe that the companies that are going in and pitching are sort of underrepresenting their product.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe thinking is sort of the gee whiz value of VR, you can look around and it moves, is going to continue to sell, and that's not the case. Investors are savvy enough at this point that they're really going to want to see what the financials are going to look like, or at least that the technology is disruptive or better than the last 10 things that they just saw. And again, I don't think I'm not faulting the innovation that's happening, because there's phenomenally innovative small companies out there. I've seen thousands of things that are just phenomenal and important to the platform to grow and fundable. But I have a feeling the teams are kind of going in a little bit unprepared to sort of sell the dream.
Okay, Shanna, do you want to weigh in?
Yeah, I mean, I think this is going to break up a lot like previous entertainment platforms have. We've gotten excited in the past about video games and video game platforms creating all kinds of different applications, and in reality, a lot of the big wins were in the content side and around just games. I think similarly, we're going to see the first wave of content that's super successful being primarily augmentation to games or games themselves.
Sure.
I think outside of that, it's going to be harder to break in and create a single piece of content that's a massive business. I think enabling platforms like what you're doing, things that allow you to produce large volumes of content that some may hit, others may not hit, is a much safer play from an investment standpoint. And then I think, this sort of step before, which is maybe not quite VR, but leading into VR, I think is where we sit, and I think there's a lot of interesting potential companies that could take advantage of it once it's on the market.
So in terms of kind of building engaging, immersive content, I was just this past weekend at this MIT VR Filmmakers Conference, and this big thing they were talking about was this idea of agency, just kind of empowering users to make their own decisions in VR, because you want to feel like it's reality. How do you guys approach doing that in your respective apps? It's a little different.
Yeah. I mean, for us, it's photorealism. Like, we have set the bar extremely high for the quality of the content that we end up producing. So most 3D content you see today looks like clip art, looks like, sort of somewhat realistic, somewhat fantasy. We feel like it has to be one-to-one, look like a photograph. And I think that's what begins to produce agency. The next step is obviously the immersion, the ability to look around. Again, though, that quality of the actual photorealism, I think, is really key when you're talking about 3D. On the video side, I'll let you talk about that.
Yeah, so I think that this harkens back to the multimedia, interactive media debate of lean forward versus lean back. Whether you want to lean back and let something be produced for you and watch it, or you want to act, sort of be an active agent in how the product is produced. And for us, NBA basketball is a perfect example. You can sit in an XVR experience, center court, and watch the entire game without moving, and feel like you're in that seat that you couldn't even buy at the NBA game, center court. But we also can allow you to move down to the end zone. So you can see a camera position, tap, and you'll be transported. And because we support trick play, you actually can pause the game, move to the end, rewind time, and do your own instant replay from another position, just as a sort of a magic power. And so you have the option to do it. The jury's out. Yeah. We're not really talking about this. whether or not users are really going to do that, or whether they're going to sit in that center seat and just sort of have that produced experience shown to them, sort of not be interactive in the experience. Some sports will be different. We just did, as I mentioned, the Kentucky Derby. There we have to move you. So it's a produced experience. You could choose if you wanted to go to the paddock or something like that, but to actually watch the race, it happens in 2 minutes. You need to sort of sit back, relax, let us take the controls and take you through the experience.
So when you're kind of switching perspectives, that makes sense for a lot of the mobile VR happening, where you're kind of sitting in a fixed point and kind of looking around like that. But how does that, does the technical capabilities exist for when you're talking about positional tracking and actually like walking around or kind of looking behind a referee or something like that?
It's in the pipeline. So right now, the devices that are deployed are almost uniformly 3 degrees of freedom. There's no positional tracking. That's the Samsung Gear VR and other mobile hardware. But positional tracking is coming even to the mobile platforms, and it's absolutely going to be here with console and PC. And so our pipeline will be expanding. We'll be demonstrating some element of positional tracking in video playback later this year with a music product. And so this gives you the ability to translate in space about a foot. So you actually can physically move about a foot, and once you get outside of the foot, we desaturate the image and sort of tap your head back into the sweet spot. But it sells presence in the video in a way that you've never seen before. It sort of sets the bar, because when you can actually move your body and you can see around occlusion. So if there's a ref standing in front of the camera on the court, you can look around and see around a little bit. And we think, once you sort of had that experience, anything less will feel like you're watching video in a fishbowl. And so we're excited about it. And that's sort of, there are signposts on the road to the holodeck, right? And we're at like signpost 2 with that. But we're going all the way.
So in terms of talking about something people are pretty concerned about, a lot of people are wondering about advertising. And I know, Shanna, this probably holds something true with Modsy that's, purpose is to sell people a lot of furniture. So what are your thoughts on, VR advertising, and whether I'm going to have to walk through a bunch of banner ads to get to anything in the future?
Yeah, I think, again, it's going to probably mirror the utility of it, right? Like, I would imagine for things where you are having an experience where it's value add, like what we're doing, and your intent is actually to shop, you don't think of it as advertising, right? It's kind of like being on Google. Your intention is high, you're looking for a solution, you're going out and proactively seeking it. I do think that, yeah, if you're in an environment and there's just ads popping up left and right, it's going to be a pretty poor experience from an immersion standpoint and an entertainment standpoint. I think, you'll start to see probably like in-game, in-environment advertising, much like we already see in games, that are kind of subtle and part of the environment and part of the experience, or pre-roll and post-roll, like we've seen again in the games environment. I think, the idea that they're going to be virtual banner ads popping in front of you is probably less realistic. Maybe things along the sidelines a little more subtly.
All right, that's good to hear. Let's see, I want to switch gears a little bit and talk a bit about accessibility in VR, because it kind of seems that a lot of the content coming out is either related to gaming, sports, no offense, or porn, to be honest. And you have to wonder, like, who is virtual reality really trying to reach out to? And given the answer to that question, most likely is white dudes, how do you kind of reach out and pick a more diverse audience?
You want me to speak as the not white dude on the
Maybe, our resident non-white dude.
Yeah, so I've been in VR for a really long time. I got into it in the late 90s and built VR content really early on, and I can say that it does appeal to a broader audience, but it's hard to get content right. And so, one, if you don't have compelling content, and two, if the form factor is in any way uncomfortable, whether that be like motion sickness or just heaviness, you are going to lean towards early adopters, a more tech-driven audience, maybe people who are gamers. And I think we're still in that kind of early adopter curve right now. That's why what we've been doing is trying to bridge that gap by providing these VR light experiences that are really 2D and 3D. Whether or not this form factor makes that transition, I'm not sold. I actually think that there is a step beyond this, and whether that's in our phone or whether it's in our eyes or whatever it is, I think to see kind of an audience that looks maybe more like me using this, it's not going to be a set of goggles sitting in my home.
I think you're absolutely right about that. The form factors are going to have to change until, before it's sort of more universal. I mean, strapping a welder's mask to your face is only appealing to a certain...
Pretty attractive. But
LG has taken an important step, I think, in this regard. Their hardware, the first generation of their hardware is first generation-y, but they have a device that's 81 grams. It just is secured to your face by temple poles, just like glasses.
Yeah.
In fact, it is glasses, and then it tethers to the phone rather than wearing the phone in front of your face. So this is sort of, you don't have to put any straps on your head. It goes on and off. It's the moral equivalent of putting earbuds in your phone and listening to audio. It's the visual equivalent of it, and I think that's that's an important step in terms of targeting content for a broader audience. I think that's sort of a trickier issue. I mean, we're building a catalog of VOD content very rapidly right now, but it is definitely in very pronounced silos around sports and music and that type of thing. We're hoping to broaden it out. We're hoping to add depth around current events and natural history and other areas that are have the sort of appeal to a niche audience, but it just takes critical mass. You have to hang that kind of thing on a critical mass of content.
So talking a little bit about the form factor, it's just important to address the skeptics, of which there's a large amount. So when you're talking about the bulkiness and the newness, you guys both chatted about earlier how you kind of have been in VR since the 90s and kind of seen these waves, ebbs and flows. A lot of people reference Google Glass. What went wrong with Google Glass, and how are the next gen AR, VR devices kind of going to make up for those mistakes?
Yeah, I mean, I think we're all really hesitant to put something in our face, right? Like that is like, it's a major step to take something and augment your own face, because that's it's your first interaction point with anybody socially, right? So it's going to have to be mass adopted. Like the trend needs to start with trendy people. I think starting it in Silicon Valley maybe sometimes works. Sometimes they're not the trendsetters. So I think the lean towards trying to get it into influencers. And then obviously the form factor needs to be something that really does hit the mark. And I think there is going to be something like that comes out that hits the mark, that probably hits a fairly young audience, that does have a form factor that is enough cool, enough cutting edge, that others want to follow suit. And as soon as it becomes cool, you'll see that kind of wave of adoption for it. But it's also got to have good battery life, not wires. It can't be uncomfortable in any way.
Yeah, I don't think Google Glass's problem was a form factor problem. I think it was a functionality problem. It just wasn't really AR. If you look at what Microsoft has done with HoloLens, it's actually, even though it certainly has limitations in its developer edition, you can purchase it now. It's fully self-contained computing device with very, very impressive AR overlay with the real world, extremely accurate. Yeah. And so, you can see the future. There are, I guess I can say this, 1,500 engineers at Microsoft working on HoloLens right now. It's a stunning number. And so that platform, for one, is going to advance really quickly, and other AR devices as well, I think.
Actually, I think that Google Glass, there was something magical about it, the navigation. And I feel like you look for the first kind of application that's going to be super mainstream and where you don't want to be looking down at something while navigating. I think that's one of the first things that, from an AR perspective, we'd all happily start applying to our everyday life, right? And then you start kind of picking away at applications after that are functional, a little more utilitarian. But then a navigation piece, especially anything that can augment the navigation, tell you a bit more about what you're looking at, I think is going to be a really magical experience.
Yeah. So we just have a couple minutes left. I think the one comment I've read on every VR story I've seen in the past couple months is, VR is just the next 3D TV. Why is it not?
Yeah, so we're particularly sensitive to the, this cautionary tale, because we were in the 3D TV business with Next3D. That's where the company was started. 3D television was a very small value add to the television viewing experience, right? You were looking at a display, a rectangular display, generally 6 to 8 feet away from you, that filled maybe 30% of your visual field. VR engages your entire visual system, almost entire visual system, your auditory system, in a way that 3D never does. So provides an experience that's immersive beyond anything that was possible, even with a very large, even in an IMAX theater, which fills maybe 60% of your visual field. And so I think they're from from the perspective of just how you can engage somebody, their sensory system, VR is a completely different animal.
Sean, quick thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, to me, if we're talking about goggles, I think it might be. That's my opinion. If we're talking about the 3D ecosystem that's going to support it and all of the kinds of content that create a different level of immersion and a different level of content experience, that's where it feels like we're creating so many incredible businesses right now, and there is going to be a future around them.
Well, I think the content creation space in VR is definitely going some awesome places. We'll see as some of these VR headsets actually arrive at people's doors. But once we get there, it's been awesome chatting with you guys. Well, a lot more to see in the space.
Awesome.
All right.
Thanks a lot.
Thanks. Thanks.